Now we come to lifecycle interpretation. So just to quickly define it, lifecycle interpretation is the phase of an LCA in which the findings of either the inventory analysis, the LCI, or the impact assessment, LCIA, or both of them are evaluated in relation to the defined goals and scope. And this is done in order to reach the conclusion and recommendations that you would like from your LCA. So looking at this using a very nice figure, on the left-hand side you can see your goal definition, your scope definition, and the inventory analysis and impact assessment that you have from your LCA. And this feeds into the interpretation phase of your LCA in various ways. So you have identification of significant issues that also feeds into evaluation of completeness, sensitivity, consistency, and other checks. And once you have all of this information, then you can make your conclusions, like you can have assessment on your limitations and also make recommendations. So to taking a better look into identification of significant issues, there are basically two interrelated aspects of this. So you take into account the main contributors to environmental impacts, like the most important life cycle stages, which include both processes and elementary flows. The main choices that have the potential to influence the precision of your final results need to be taken a look at. For example, the methodological choices, so like which cutoffs do you use to include or exclude data, what assumptions you made in the first place, the data itself and the quality of the data, and also your LCIA methods. The evaluation itself is performed to establish the foundation by subsequently drawing conclusions and then providing recommendations during the interpretation of the results. What you do here is you have completeness checks, so is your data and analysis complete, sensitivity checks in combination with the scenario analysis, and potentially uncertainty analysis, essentially looking at the scenarios that you have and trying to see which parts of the data are more sensitive to your outcomes or your analysis. This basically comes to the point that is very, very important, that lifecycle analysis is a very, very iterative approach. So you might have your first iteration where you have your you take into account your full product system, and you have very specific data for your LCI, and you also have very easily available secondary data, and you use this and you come up with some kind of a conclusion. But in your second iteration you try to revise your scope, and maybe you need some better data for key processes or more specific data for foreground processes. This is basically the part of interpretation comes in. So you have some kind of analysis of what you've done so far and decide to change. So this might happen many, many times, and you can have a third iteration, a fourth iteration of essentially the same cycle happening over and over. And your overall data quality and accuracy is going to keep increasing as you have more iterations, but also the time and effort. So it's important to have a good balance. So if you only have a certain amount of time, you might be limited to having only so many iterations. Finally, we have the final stage of this process. So you have reporting and critical review. A reporting strategy is very integral to your LCA, and it should contain the results and conclusions of your LCA, and with some kind of an adequate form to the intended audience. If you might remember, we defined the intended audience of your LCA at the very beginning in your goal, and your report should account for this fact. And it should also address the data, methods, and assumptions that were applied in the study, and all the limitations that you had in the process. And it's also really healthy to have a critical review of your LCA. It basically enhances the credibility and the understanding of it. And essentially this will verify whether the LCA has met the requirements for the methodology, the data interpretation, and also reporting whether it's consistent with its principles. So essentially, have you attained and adhered to the principles that you set out in the first place? This can be carried out by either an internal team or an external expert. Or it could also be a panel of interested people who are interested in looking at your LCA. So there isn't a very specific way in which these reviews can be conducted. This brings us to the conclusion of this lecture. So we looked at a high-level overview and guide to lifecycle assessment. We included goal and scope definition, in which we talked about functional units and reference flows. Following this, we looked at lifecycle inventory analysis, including unit processes and process flows, and also we talked about how we can relate these with your original functional units and reference flows. Then we looked at lifecycle impact assessment, such as impact categories, classification, characterization, and we looked at some examples. We also looked at lifecycle interpretation, which included evaluation of your LCA and also reporting and critical review. Throughout this process, we also looked at examples from Polestar, the first example that we showed, and also the 2020 EU Commission report, and also our own MushR project. We hope that the resources we provide are enough for you to look at these examples on your own time.